Good morning everyone. Today I'm sharing with you my deepest secret on street photography. Today we're talking about street photography here in Tokyo, Japan. I simply picked this place because after we're at like 7+ months of traveling around the world, I thought this was a great opportunity to actually share with you how I approach street photography. There are so many settings that you could be using. There is a wide variety of gear also that's going to influence really the way you're going to be shooting, and some gear are going to make you more shy than others. So the first part we're going to be talking about is going to be settings. Let's get in a more quiet street with Akihabara right here, and it's kind of crazy. So whenever you're shooting an image, whenever you want to take a photo, there are, in my opinion, only two things you should know beforehand. The first one is going to be, do you want your subject to be in focus? When I say in focus, I mean sharp, or do you want your subject to be blurry for the effect? The second thing you want to know is, do you want your subject to stick out of the background, or do you want your subject to blend in the background? That's going to define the parameters you're going to be setting in your camera for 99% of your shots. The first thing I want you to know is that 90% of the time I'm shooting in Aperture Priority mode. This is the A on your camera, and it allows me to actually only control the depth of field of an image. The rest of the parameters are going to be controlled automatically by my camera. What it allows me to do is really have that subject stick out of the background if I'm shooting at a very shallow depth of field, or actually crank up the f-stop as much as possible around 9-10 if I want a very deep image where everything is in focus, like for example cityscape, landscape, stuff like that. When you're shooting in Aperture Priority, there is also a little trick that is available on most cameras, and that will allow you to actually set the minimum shutter speed for your camera. And let me tell you, this is the most essential thing you should be looking when you're getting a new camera, is can you set a minimum shutter speed or not? I'm gonna tell the camera, I'm setting my aperture, so f2.8, now do whatever you want, but do not go below a shutter speed, because I want to freeze my subject, and I know that if my shutter speed goes below, my subject's gonna be blurry. So that's a great trick. Whenever you don't understand why most of your shots are blurry, well, that is usually why. And usually when you have a minimum shutter speed that you can set, you also have an ISO range that you can set up in your camera. That is very important. Simply, if some cameras have high ISO that are very bad, well, then you just want to tell your camera, please do not go above ISO 3200. I don't want to be crying over my footages that look bad. So that's a good example of when to limit your ISO. Personally, on the Sony a7 III that I'm using right now, I limited to only 12,800, which is super high, but the images still look good, so I don't really care. My minimum shutter speed is 1/250 of a second that I use for most of my shots whenever they're not going too fast. If they're going faster, I use minimum shutter speed of 1/500 of a second. That really helps me not have to think too much about the camera and just thinking about capturing the image I want to capture. Great example, we're in Kyoto the other day, and Kyoto is famous for geishas. By the way, there are only 300 of them left in the country, but they're like shadows in Kyoto. You're very lucky if you see a real one. And I was walking one night, managed to see one, but the camera, I was slightly too slow. I went in a different mode earlier, and I was slightly too slow to set it back up and shoot the geisha, so I didn't frame it correctly, and that was too bad. If I had left it like I'm shooting all the time, I would have gotten the right shot. But that's what happens. That's also the beauty of street photography. Every time you're going to be shooting, it's going to be absolutely different. It's unique. Now, what if you want to capture a bit more difficult shots, or have a very specific mood in your shots? Well, then I usually shoot in manual mode, and I set everything manually. I'm going to be setting my ISO, my shutter speed, and the aperture also. So for example, if I'm shooting the crowd and I want the crowd to be blurry, I'm gonna be shooting at maybe 1/5 of a second, 1/4 of a second, or even below that. That will really allow me to capture like those people walking and have a nice blur in them, while maybe I have a subject in the middle of that crowd. That subject's gonna be like tack sharp, which is kind of a really nice effect. I don't know if you realize where I am, but I am next to one of the biggest photography shops in the world, right over there, and I'll take you through it in another episode, but I'm just gonna finish on the settings. There is another very important component that you might be wondering is, should you set your autofocus to be in single mode or in continuous mode? For that, I think it really depends on the situation. If you're in a situation where your subjects are not moving, I highly recommend you to stay in AFS. So if your subjects are moving, like people walking by or like a bike coming towards you, a car, anything, just go ahead and continue autofocus. Why? Is because you want the camera to be refocusing the whole time the subject is moving. I used to shoot a lot in AFS, which is single shots, and now I shoot more and more in AFC and continuous, simply because my autofocus is so good that I don't have to worry too much and I don't have to recompose as much as I used to. It's getting windy. Is it gonna rain? Alright, now let's talk about the most difficult part, which is, in my opinion, the gear. The settings are easy, but choosing my gear is actually very difficult. There is a reason for that. Depending on what kind of gear you're gonna have a totally different approach with your subject. Let's say you're shooting on a wide angle, you're gonna have to get very close to your subject to get that shot and really to get the feeling that you want with a wide angle. If you're shooting with a teleobjective, with a zoom, or like a 50mm, 85mm, 135 or 200, well then it's easier. You can be sniper, you can be from way further and shoot directly into a shop, for example, which is not possible if you're using a wide angle. Here's the gear I'm using 70% of the time. I'm on my 16-35mm f2.8, simply because I also use it a lot for video. If I'm very honest with you, if I was shooting just street photography, I would most likely have a prime lens, which is around 35mm 1.4 or 50mm maybe 1.8. The reason behind that is that I feel like when I have prime lens, I'm gonna move a lot more to get the shot. I'm gonna be able to get more into the action. Now I'm traveling around the world for a year. I can't have the luxury of taking different prime lenses with me. So the second lens I use, because if I didn't have that, I would actually use a 85mm 1.8, 1.4, something like that. The other lens that I use is a 70-200 2.8. It is massive. For street photography, I can tell you, people look at you kind of funny, even more when you have the lens hood on. When you're shooting with a lens like that at 85mm, between 85mm or 300mm at a shallow depth of field, you're gonna have a lot of compression happening. What is compression? It's just gonna mean that instead of having your background look very far away, it's gonna make all the buildings, everything look very, very close to you. Would I recommend that to anyone for street photography? Most likely no. No guys, don't use that. Just get a nice prime lens like 85mm. You're gonna be so much more discreet. And if you have a Micro Four Thirds sensor, or if you're on Olympus, Fuji, Panasonic, they have those tiny little lenses that are 42.5, which are millimeters, which are equivalent on a full frame to a 85mm. I'm telling you, that is absolutely beautiful. And it's so tiny, no one sees you in the street. You know, when you're arriving with a big full frame camera, I can tell you, people look at you differently. And I don't know if you can see, but this is how I'm shooting right now. So everyone's looking at the camera and stuff. It's difficult to be very discreet and have those raw emotions from people without then feeling like they either have to pose or they're gonna tell you, please don't take that photo. So if I had only one recommendation in terms of lenses, maybe get a prime lens like 24mm or 35mm with a shallow depth of field, and get an 85mm, which is gonna be awesome for everything that's people, portrait, and just zooming a bit in. So I've put for you guys in the description a few lenses that I can recommend. Remember, it doesn't really matter so much your gear, it's really about you getting out there and starting to take those photos, getting comfortable shooting in the streets, shooting maybe stranger or situations. And also do not hesitate to talk to the people you're shooting. They're usually actually very happy to see the picture you just took, or just maybe give you a little interaction, or just nod and say that it's okay for you to take that picture, because it's actually also very nice to know that the people are happy with you shooting them. Alright, we talked about the settings I used, we talked about the gear. If you have any other question, let me know in the comments below. Also share your Instagram with me in the comments. I'd love to see what you guys create. Remember, I'm doing 12 countries in 12 months with my wife. We have another travel channel that's basically just about that. This channel is fully about photography and video. I want to share with you what I know about it, and I just want to share also how it feels like shooting around the world. So if you like that, make sure you hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, and I will see you in the next episode where I'm gonna take you on the biggest camera store in the world. That should be a pretty fun adventure. There's a lot of cameras I didn't even know existed until I'm going there in the next episode. Yeah, I know it's weird. I actually saw a preview of the store. That's why, yeah, okay, see you in the next episode, guys. Bye. Guys, if you learned anything in that video, please make sure you share. Sharing is caring. Look at that, Mario Kart cards going by in Tokyo. This place is insane.